So I'm going to focus on this paper, an actionable framework for understanding and improving developer experience. And the idea behind me reading this paper is to try and get a data or scientific-based mechanism or understanding of what is developer experience. Now, I have to admit that it is very subjective. How you feel about whether you were successful in producing code or not, or whether you felt successful in producing code or not, whether you felt good about the code you produced or not, is subjective. And because it's subjective, it's a bit ambiguous as to whether something is truly considered developer experience or not. Because I can tell you for sure, I know at least a few developers who would look at the current state of web development and go, this is the most terrible way to write code, period. And they would much rather write in assembly, and they would feel better doing it. And another person would look at the current state of web and look at someone else writing assembly for web, for example, and go, why on earth would you do that? That feels terrible. My way feels better. Right? And that's the problem with subjective experiences. Why should your subjective experience be the authority over anybody else's subjective experience? And you know that there is somebody who disagrees with your subjective experience about how you wrote some code. Developers do like to solve puzzles. Programmers do like to solve puzzles. That I think is fundamentally true, generally speaking. But you're always going to find someone who subjectively feels about it a different way. I know this for a fact. There are people who are like, I just work better in C. It feels better. It just feels better. I could write an entire web framework in C and do it faster and better, and I feel good about it. And then someone will do, well, like I like pulling in all my like 600 NPM packages because I know that I don't have to reinvent the wheel. Like, why would I go and reinvent a bunch of stuff in a low-level language and learn all the intricacies of memory management and all that? That's crazy. It's been solved. That doesn't feel good. You can find subjective experiences either way. But because I made a commitment to try and stick to science and data and not emotional arguments, I'm going to try and do it. But unfortunately, even the papers here agree that there is subjectivity with developer experience. Improving developer happiness and satisfaction is an important goal for many companies, as doing so may lead to higher levels of productivity and improve worker retention. Previous research has focused on understanding and eliciting factors that help describe or predict developer productivity and satisfaction, and which factors may impact developers' productivity and satisfaction with their work depends on individual team, organization, and project context. Developer experience, as defined by Fagerholm and Munk, I believe is how you pronounce it, is a broader concept that captures how developers feel about, think about, and value their work. This definition emerged from a review of the literature, and these authors claim that developer experience is also shaped by many factors, including team culture, working environment, and work activities, but, like satisfaction, is also highly personal. Fagerholm and Munk's research provides an initial framework for thinking about the different dimensions of developer experience, but it falls short at identifying which actionable factors impact developer experience, as well as why certain factors may be particularly important and how challenges that impede developer experience may be overcome. Notably, some factors and barriers that impact experience may be more actionable or easier to act on than others. For example, poor directional clarity in a project may be easier to act on than a developer's personality style. So, what they try and do is they try and take things like things that get in the way of developer experience, things that help developer experience, so on and so forth, and then they provide some context around like the methodology behind it. So, the background behind it is based on this paper from Fagerholm and Munk. It's rooted in social psychology from the concept of the trilogy of the mind, where the three main dimensions of human experience are cognition, thinking, or the logical faculties, affect, or emotion, and conation, or volition to act. Consideration of these three dimensions of experience is important as real-world problem-solving operates in concert with motivational and emotional processes, sometimes harmoniously and sometimes discordantly. This is exactly why I brought up cult-like mentality, where your emotional faculties override your logical faculties, and that is just a psychological fact. It happens to everyone a lot. The cognitive dimension concerns developers' beliefs and how they think and evaluate their development infrastructure, processes, knowledge, and skills. The affective dimension of the mind, or the emotional, describes developers' emotions and how they feel about their work. The cognitive dimension of experience captures developers' expectations, motivations, and how they see the value of their work behaviors, their activities, productivity, and contributions. Together, these dimensions interact and shape the intentions for future work behavior and actions. And you can actually come up with like a pretty reasonable case for why this holds quite true. So you could think of something like, if you're in Agile and you need to meet a certain number of story points, what happens is a twofold thing. One is, if you hit your story points week after week and you successfully hit the number of story points you're supposed to hit, it feels good. And then your logical mind says, well, it also probably means that you're accomplishing something. Right? And so you put the two together, and then it's the conation part that kicks in, and it's like, whoa, holy crap, these are in sync. I not only feel good because I'm achieving the goals that I'm setting out for myself, but I'm also actually probably logically solving issues because I can see the effect of like, we get new features out, something like that. And so the conation part kicks in, and so you want to act on that. You want to continue to act on that. Individual personality and other traits shape the three dimensions of the mind, but the three dimensions are also shaped by external and social forces, such as the nature of the work environment, and whether one is working as part of a team or collective. Factors that influence one dimension will typically also influence one or two of the other dimensions. The theory of the trilogy of mind aligns with our view of the developer experience and also helps us understand the important factors that shape developer experience when working with others. Okay. Now, right about here, factors that impact developer experience. Graziotin et al. It just means, it's Latin for like and everyone else who was involved in the paper. Investigated developer happiness, an affective state, an emotional state, through a survey, and found that the top factors associated with unhappiness were, in order of impact, being stuck in problem solving, feeling time pressure to complete work, bad code quality and coding practice, underperforming colleagues, feeling inadequate about work, boring or repetitive tasks, unexplained broken code, bad decision making in their team, imposed limitations due to infrastructure, and personal issues that are not related to their work. They also found that feelings of happiness correlate with perceived productivity. They found that happier developers tended to perceive higher productivity and vice versa. Bellet et al. Also report a strong relation between productivity and happiness. Now, you have to remember that this is perceived productivity. Perceived productivity is also subjective because it is usually a self-reporting mechanism. It is usually a mechanism by which the developer is asked, did you feel productive? And a manager is asked, do you think they were productive? Murphy Hill et al. Investigated which factors can predict software development productivity through a study with 3 companies. They found that being enthusiastic for one's job was the top predictor for productivity, followed by having supportive team members of their ideas and having autonomy over their tools and work. A literature review conducted by Wagner et al. Details even more factors that have been found to associate with reported or perceived productivity. Story et al. Researched developer satisfaction with their work, building on Wright and Cropenzano's definition of job satisfaction as an internal state that is expressed by affectively or emotionally, and or cognitively or thinking logically, evaluating an experienced job with some degree of favor or disfavor. The satisfaction factors Story et al. Identified through a large survey at Microsoft include doing impactful work, being an important contributor on their team, having a positive work and team culture, feeling productive, receiving appreciation and rewards. I just want to highlight feeling productive, receiving appreciation and rewards, and experiencing a positive work-life balance. They also found a bidirectional relationship between satisfaction and developer productivity, and that there are additional factors that influence productivity: autonomy in one's work, ability to complete tasks, and the quality of the engineering system. Motivation for work aligns most closely with the cognitive dimension of developer experience. I'm not sure how to pronounce this properly. Steglick et al., through a literature review, summarized a number of social factors that influence developers' motivation to work in mobile software system ecosystems, some of which are the opportunity to learn something new, to have fun, and to collaborate with others. Beecham et al. Also studied developer motivation in a systemic literature review and identified many personal and work characteristics that moderate the influence of a large number of motivating factors. Example, good managers, task fit, empowerment, and demotivating factors, poor managers, poor working environment, stress. Subsequent work by Sharp et al. Proposed a model of motivation in software engineering that includes motivators, outcomes, characteristics, and context. More recently, empirical studies by Franke and colleagues identified a variety of factors that affect motivation, such as career progression and autonomy. Franke et al. Point out that motivation and job satisfaction are not the same thing, which aligns with the three-dimensional view of developer experience proposed by Fragerholm and Munk, with motivation more closely aligned with a cognitive dimension and satisfaction with a cognitive dimension. Previous research has collectively identified hundreds of factors, and many factors overlap because developer satisfaction, productivity, and motivation are related. Our research spans not just one or two constructs, such as satisfaction or productivity, but factors which affect developer experience overall. Hereby, our focus is to identify which of these factors are most important. Okay, so then they go and ask, essentially, explain what they did. So it's basically a survey, and so they ask these questions that they need to answer essentially as part of the paper. What important factors affect developer experience? What contextual characteristics influence how important a factor is to a developer's experience? What barriers impede developers and their teams from improving factors that affect developer experience? What strategies do developers and their teams employ to improve developer experience? What coping mechanisms do developers resort to when factors that negatively impact developer experience are not improved? So then they go through a structured interview. They tell you how they do it. They do a Zoom interview. It's like 45 to 90 minutes. They ask questions. They get like feedback from like the developer and encourage them to like make sure that they answer, appropriately, things like that. And then they have a framework that they essentially go over, like, here's the framework that we use to, for example, here, right? So these are things that we want to tackle as part of our, us trying to figure out the questions we need to answer, the framework upon the questions we need to answer. I'm having a brain fart here. All right. Then they go through the participants. I can't, where do they have the total number of participants? Oh yeah. It's 21 software developers. Okay. So it's not a lot. It's not a lot. Honestly, it's 21. But again, all it takes is for one person's subjective experience or subjective viewpoint to be completely opposite of one other person. And at the very least, it gives like a light hint on what developer experience is. And so they go over the context of each developer so that you can see these are the participants up to 21. You can see what their company size is. So it's pretty varied. You can see which industry they're in, the team that they were involved in, and their size, their current role, and the number of years of experience, which is also reasonably varied. So then they break up the participants in terms of what kinds of contexts are they coming in with. And so then they have the framework, which we essentially went over, and they go over the individual aspects of the framework. Okay, so now we get to answers from participants. Hey, Frack, good to see you too, man. I'll catch up on chat after. I'm focused on this for now. Sorry. The development and release category consists of factors relating to developers' code bases, as well as the tools used to write and release code. Codebase health refers to the quality, maintainability, and ease of working in a codebase and its impact on developer experience. As participant 6 shared, part of what affects developer experience is the codebase itself. This is a tough problem, right? Working on a legacy codebase, it was poorly architected and just hard to understand, tightly coupled. All the things that make a code base tough to work with and tough to change. That is actually a major factor. The development environment was an additional factor, participant 1 shared. The very first thing that came to my mind was around the tooling or any friction around the tooling that either makes it really painless to go from I'm working on an idea to I'm testing that idea in production. The tooling that makes it painful to go from point A to point B. I just want you to think about that for a second. The tooling that makes it painful to go from I'm working on an idea to I'm testing it to production. They also added, what affects developer experience is how quickly I can compile my code, how fast continuous integration runs, how long it takes me to be able to deploy my change to a lab environment or production environment, how reliable my tests are, anything that extends the feedback loop. This factor also includes aspects of engineering infrastructure such as the setup and configuration, as well as debugging and monitoring. You notice anything missing from this answer? We've already been over it, so it's a rhetorical question. Another factor participants shared was having sufficient automated testing. Participant 12 stated, insufficient test coverage, for example, which makes it incredibly hard to do any changes. And then also super complicated code bases where things are really badly designed. So really it's about confidence in that case. Everything that builds confidence, that makes it easy to understand what's going on and be confident that the change you're doing is the right one. That is a big thing for developer experience to me. And if you notice anything, because I certainly do, but let's keep going. Lastly, a factor that emerged in several interviews was frictionless releases. For example, participant 12 stated, we spend a lot of effort on reducing cycle time, on improving the experience for PRs, to reduce the time it takes to get things out in production and get them safely out into production. So all these things come together to deliver more software and to be able to do small incremental improvements without experiencing any problems. Previous research also identified that the above factors relating to engineering systems, codebase, tools, and processes have an impact on developer productivity and satisfaction. Here are some more, answers. If you have to touch a certain piece of code every other week and the whole code base around it is suboptimal and flawed, then making changes to that code is always very difficult and a little dangerous. Or if it's not tested well, or if you don't even understand the full scope because there are so many things attached, then making changes, even for new features, to that part of the code is not a nice task, I'd say. That's participant 3. The developer tools that people use are affecting developers' experience. So I work on the .NET stack mostly, and the tooling is actually great. But there is a tool called ReSharper, which is like an add-on that companies have to pay for, which makes you a lot more productive, and other types of tools. So I think tooling and the development environment itself is another big piece of it. The founders of the company, this is another answer, when we would go to them for that criticism or what we need, they weren't very responsive for it. They didn't care, or at least they didn't show any sort of empathy about it or any understanding of our situation. They just said, keep working. And so I think there was always an effort to try to improve, but we started noticing the patterns and gave up trying. We knew that at some point it doesn't matter. We just need to do our job. And that was kind of the reason why we would just complain to each other, because there was no point to reach out anymore because we tried it and it didn't work. I just want to like let that settle in here. Just kind of like soak up these answers. Having clear goals, scope, and requirements can greatly affect developer experience. So skipping down to some of the answers. Participant 13 stated, the goals and ambitions that the product team wants, I understand them, and I see that these projects are important, but I think that the time frame that they want them in is not conducive to developing good software and lasting software. There's sort of a struggle. Participant 13 also added, I sort of have seen that high-stress projects with tight deadlines can lead to definitely degraded experience and interpersonal interactions between engineers. Participant 11 said, for me, what I find the most valuable in my work is that I'm providing value to the business. So if I'm able to find a bug that may not be fun or interesting, as long as it unblocks the business, I feel that I've done something rewarding that day. Participants also mentioned how unforeseen changes can lead to thrown away effort. The absolute worst developer experience is when I feel like I have a very clear goal and I get done or almost done, and it's like, oh no, we have to change it completely, because then you have to start from the beginning. Participant 7 talked about how agile process leads to changing requirements. A lot of work that I do ends up being replaced by some other work, like immediately. I mean, I see the results of my work, but maybe 30% of it goes to nothing exactly because the situation changed. Supportiveness, one of the biggest ones is the amount of time that more experienced devs have to spend with you. I notice that on days where everyone's busy and people don't have time for me, my frustration level goes up exponentially, where I'm struggling with a problem for hours that I know someone already has the answer to, but they don't have the time to give me a little bit of guidance first. That's probably the single biggest factor to whether I have a good or bad day at work. Knowledge sharing and feeling connected, participant 14. There is the connectedness to the colleagues around you, and it just helps if you have a very direct and instantaneous communication with your peers around you, which really helps you build connections, which also helps in how you support each other in a team. And I think that's very important for a developer, because I am a full stack developer. So we touch several systems with several programming languages, and I cannot be aware of every single system. So in some sense, I really rely on information from my colleagues. So if I have this spontaneous connection to my colleagues around me, it is much easier to get information and just understand and communicate what needs to happen in certain systems. Code review process, psychological safety, feeling safe and be able to speak one's minds, an open-minded culture where less experienced developers can speak up, communication between developers and teams, having aligned values, getting recognition, developer flow, autonomy, how much freedom I have in making technical decisions versus somebody telling me which approach to take for a certain problem. Now, this one I find so rich, because you're more than happy to import any number of packages that solve problems for you, that make technical decisions for you, and come with any amount of baggage like security issues. Again, as has been demonstrated in the previous streams, where things are getting much, much worse for defects, security across the board, both in web and software. But you want to feel like you have the choice of which bad poison pill to take. But not every developer wants total autonomy. Several participants talked about how having autonomy is important, but that it must be bounded. For example, participant 5 explained, autonomy. That's one of the things that comes to my mind, but not, let's say, unbounded autonomy, but kind of know your limits in a way. Know where you can go towards and where you can't. So you know where it's safe for you to experiment and be creative about, and so on. One of my struggles today is not knowing where I cannot go to, not knowing what's off limits. And that means that anything can be off limits. So you kind of feel trapped in a way. Maybe because you don't actually understand the tools you're using, because they've abstracted so much from you. And they've catered to how you feel. So when it comes time to logically assessing how far you can push the envelope, you actually don't know how far you can push it. Challenging and stimulating work. Participant 20 explained, the other part of developer experience is the work that I'm doing in and of itself. Like, there is kind of like these bands, starting with this is just easy, busy work, to there's that middle ground of I'm learning something new, this is challenging, but I'm not in over my head. And then you've got that top level of here, do this, and you have no idea what you're doing. So having the correct, I guess, level of work. Making progress without obstacles, having enough uninterrupted time, work-life balance, and being able to learn. Lastly, participants shared the stability of their job and team and having clear paths for career growth. So what factors were important to them? Psychological safety is paramount. One consistent pattern we observed is that participants described psychological safety as more important than other factors. More important than other factors. So how you feel about that crappy code you wrote and about all the security issues you NPM installed is more important than the crappy code you wrote and all the security issues you installed with NPM. Participant 9 said, I don't think that a not perfect code base is a reason for somebody to leave the company. Let's put it that way. Whereas if you have a toxic culture in your company, that's when people think of leaving a company and actually really do it. Participant 12 expressed in similar terms, culture is a very big thing. I would even say that these are like baseline traits that you have to have. Otherwise, everything else really does not matter. Apparently, poor psychological safety discourages developers from speaking up about problems or making proactive improvements. Now, I will agree here. If you do have a toxic work culture where you're constantly being pooped on and you don't feel like you can say anything, well then how are you actually going to try and make an improvement? Completely agree. For other factors that were shared through our interviews, participants described importance in terms of their personal or project circumstances. These contextual characteristics are outlined, etc. Presence of problems trumps other factors. One common theme that emerged is that developers perceive the presence of problematic factors more strongly and therefore as being more important than factors which contribute positively to their experience. This effect is known in research as the positive-negative asymmetry effect, or negativity bias, which describes how negative events have a bigger impact on a person's experience and memory than positive events, even of the same type. Expectations determine importance. Participants express that problems that are expected or perceived as normal bother than less than what? I don't know what that means. It's like so normal that the continuous integration, like everything is slow, that it is no longer something that is so much discussed because it also takes more time. And we have a specific team that is doing just that. Very much this. People become complacent with the state of affairs when there are a huge number of bugs, when things are slow, when things are non-performant. Developers start to kind of overlook it. It just becomes status quo. Managers do it, executives do it. Users, the end users do it. So when an end user opens up that mobile application that was created using some hybrid stupid technology and it crashes, 10% of the time because it can't handle the amount of whatever the heck ever you're doing with it, users just go, okay, this is normal now. Stuff crashes all the time on my phone now. It's normal. It's just how it is. Seniority influences importance. So the weight of these factors depends on your seniority as well. Personal interest, company goals, company maturity. So then they talk about things that can help to improve developer experience. And I think it's pretty obvious. It's basically just the things that were stated as problems. Just try and do the opposite of those or come up with like ways around them. But essentially make sure that your programmers are feeling essentially validated and that their developer experience is good. Their psychological safety is good. Now, to some degree, I can absolutely agree with that. To another degree, though, it's gone too far, where we focus more on how the developer feels about what they're doing. And so when they say, I feel good, I feel good, I feel good, there's a translation layer that happens somewhere along the line where somebody, say up in the chain, goes, well, they all feel good, so therefore their productivity must be good too. It's not always the case. But the point here of reading this was that a lot of these factors are indeed subjective. And you can even see that your subjectivity changes. So for example, the participant who stated that, well, our continuous integration being slow, I just got used to it. That's a subjective feeling that changed based on context. That's not a logical feeling. So if you're going to think about something logically, the end conclusion typically is a binary mode. It's a logical, it either is something or is not something, it is true or it is false. You typically don't logically change something or become accustomed to something changing from a logical perspective. Not usually, but that happens a lot with feelings, right? So you can see that, like, even with this paper, even though I do agree with some of the points, like 100%, there is a lot of subjectivity. So let's go to, actually, I need to keep that one up. All right. I'll read the abstract essentially. Software developers are both users of development tools, but also designers of new software systems. Now, I won't read everything in here, but this one stood out to me because we started off with an article from Hassan about how we might be able to write better software for your average user that is high quality, very easy to use, and well within reach for us to build. But we often forget that we as developers and programmers are also users of our own tools. So for example, if you're going to pull something in like HTMX, if you're going to use something like Sublime or Vim or VS Code, or you're going to use a browser, or you're going to write a bunch of tests, you are the user of a tool that another programmer created for you. So for a moment, take off your programmer hat and actually ask yourself how satisfied you are with the state of software, tools, and web tools from the perspective of a user who has to write abstractions or other code based on those tools. So the paper goes on to talk about, IDEs. IDEs are essentially one of the primary tools that programmers use. And the idea behind like having a good experience with your tools is that as you're developing, you can get into a good flow, right? And that might come with so for example, they bring out user experience. They bring out the ability to concentrate and work alone for many hours, which requires things like analytical stuff, tools to help you get through that process from a logical thinking, aspect, piecing together the code that you want to do. And so all of these tools have an impact on your developer experience, right? And so it's like work on top of work. And so they provide a developer experience framework that is centered around Qt Creator, which is an IDE tool for Qt or Qt. And it is a tool that programmers use to create IDEs. So when they talk about UX, it's not about the UX output of Qt Creator. It's about the UX of Qt or Qt or whatever, right? Like, how does the developer feel about the UX? Does it help them get into the flow? Are they able to focus? Is the tool getting in their way? Things like that. And so they did a study. They had 57 developers from 25 different countries, and they kind of break down what they felt about using Qt Creator. When was this? What year would this have been? I don't remember what year this was. 2016. There we go. So if we go back down here. Okay. So they start off here. The use of work-related tools can be mandatory since often the employer is the one who selects the tool to be used. We measured perceived choice of use with a scale question. I use Qt Creator because I have no choice. It had a significant negative correlation with these numbers that they go over. Thus, developers who perceived high level of choice in use of the IDE assessed OUX and NFS higher than developers who perceived their use of the IDE as mandatory. In addition, developers with low perceived choice enjoyed using the IDE less. There was a moderate negative correlation between perceived choice and the IMI item. I enjoy using Qt Creator very much. So choice matters, and choice actually has an impact on how you feel about the tool. Now, this is kind of interesting because it's almost like choice takes precedence over whether the tool is actually good or not. It's a strange emotional thing. Best qualities of the IDE and opportunities for improvement. Respondents considered efficiency, flexibility, informativeness, and intuitiveness the best qualities of Qt Creator, and flexibility, informativeness, and reliability required improvement the most. So even programmers, as users of tools, so if you just take off your programming hat, you are the user of a tool that another programmer created. Programmers themselves have a ranking system for how that tool affects them. Efficiency, flexibility, informativeness, and intuitiveness. That is a massive overlap in how end users who are not programmers would rank the use of the tools that are built for them, whether it's in website form or desktop form or on mobile apps. Doesn't matter. Whatever your medium is, the overlap is huge because you as a programmer are also a user. So if you are the one who cares that your tool has these things, why do you not care about that which is that you produce with this tool also has those things? And so then you can see the chart of, the respondents and where they lie in terms of what they feel is important in the tool that they're using. And in this case, it was Qt Creator. So I think they go, right here. So Fragerholm et al.'s framework of devx addresses the concept in terms of factors related to the perception of development infrastructure, feelings towards work, and the value of the developer's contribution. They relate cognition to the perception of infrastructure, affect with feelings towards the work, and intention connection with the value of contribution. In our study, the IDE itself represents the development infrastructure, and cognition, affect, and intention were addressed with regard to it. Our results indicate that developers also address the infrastructure via intention and affect. Their IM was towards both the use of the IDE and the development work. Some developers describe the best qualities of the IDE with affection. In addition, the overall UX assessment of developers seemed to be affected more by the hedonic than pragmatic quality of the IDE, since the mean value of the hedonic aspect of UX HQ was on the borderline of being a significant predictor of overall UX, whereas the overall UX could not be predicted from the practical or general quality. So just like I just said, programmers, as users of the tools that are built by other programmers, have an emotional response. Thus, our results suggest that Fragerholm et al. Overemphasize the cognitive approach of developers towards the development infrastructure. Moreover, the developer's intrinsic motivation also seems to focus on using the IDE, while Fragerholm et al. Associated it with the developer's contribution. However, the IDE is used to create a contribution, and thus our study cannot separate motivation towards the development work itself and motivation towards the software under development. So this is kind of like a duality that is at odds, because you definitely want your tool to assist you in your ability to create like high quality, performant, efficient code. That's why you would use a tool. And you could extend that requirement to anything like an npm install or a webpack compilation or Next or Vite or Rust package manager, or take your pick, microservices, with a bunch of stuff, Docker containers, any of the tools that you use. You want things to be performant and efficient. And yet there's still a like user-based view on it, like an end user, like when a person who doesn't know the technical aspect of things is using a tool, they don't really care how good it felt to create it from your perspective. They don't really care whether or not it was like cutting edge or anything like that. Is it efficient? Is it performant? Is it informative? Can I use it correctly? How does it make me feel when I use it? So there's actually a huge overlap, and the two things are at odds. And I think we as programmers forget that. And I think at the management level and the executive level, we have to remember that there's a balance to be struck, and we've leaned way too much into one side and not enough on the other.